Oh, good. All right. Um, just want to take a couple seconds to do some introductions and just say thank you to Millersville University for hosting this webinar for us, and on behalf of the National Hazard Mitigation Association and FEMA as well for holding this, and with FEMA Region 3 as well. I want to introduce the speakers today. We have Will Melville, the Data Section Supervisor, and Hailey Stern, the Partnerships Coordinator for FEMA Region 3's Mitigation Division. They're going to go through some data collection stuff and climate change and economic justice screening tool for you guys. Great tools, some great things that we're going to do in the future with it. And with that, I'll just let you guys give a better introduction for yourselves and go for there.
Sure, I will start sharing our slideshow. Right. Okay. Well, good morning, good Friday morning, everyone. My name is Will Melville, as Rick presented, and I am the Data Section Supervisor for FEMA Region 3. We're based out of here in Philadelphia. And Hailey?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Hailey Stern. I'm the Partnerships Coordinator for FEMA Region 3's Mitigation Division. We both work in the Mitigation Operations branch, and we support all aspects of the regional mitigation programming, from risk map, our floodplain management section, our hazard mitigation assistance grants, and even more. So we're going to talk a little bit about equity in data today, and show you some of the tools that FEMA and the federal government have developed over the last few years to really advance mitigation. Will, is there anything else you want to say before we get started?
No, I think we're going to be going through a lot of different kinds of tools, and kind of look at the interconnected nature between the two, between multiple of the tools where they're using a lot of the same data sets. And we're going to highlight kind of the impact that this data has on our communities and our states. That's really the key takeaway from this, is going to be understanding kind of like how these tools are impactful beyond just, helping you plan or prioritize, but like what action can you take using these tools? So hopefully this is a practical presentation for you all, and you get to learn something. But that's it for me.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I will get us started. If you have any questions, I am going to ask you just to put them in the chat and hold them till the end so we can get through some of the demos. We're going to be looking at how you can compare different communities and how they're vulnerable to disasters. And using these tools can provide additional context to the decisions we make as emergency managers. And we're also going to share some examples on how FEMA has started to use this data and ways it may be applied at the state and local levels. Next slide, please. So just there's two things I want to mention up front as we get started to put this conversation into context. I'm going to talk a little bit about equity to set the stage for this demo. First, we're presenting these tools as a way to help our actions result in more equitable outcomes. Understanding social vulnerability is not equity in itself. Social vulnerability is the susceptibility of social groups to the negative impacts of natural hazards, including disproportionate death, injury, loss, or destruction of livelihood. How we can use this data to adjust our actions, and then the results of those actions can lead to equity. So also using these tools can lead to conversations about vulnerability. And this is challenging, but we have to be very conscious not to define communities by their vulnerabilities. When I work with communities that, may be marginalized, it's not how you talk about them to communities, but it is important to recognize the demographic differences and why those structures in our society kind of impact communities differently. Next slide, please. So FEMA defines equity in a few different ways, but here's the official definition. So it's the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatments of all individuals, including individuals who belong to underserved communities that have been systematically denied a full opportunity to participate in aspects of economic, social, and civic life. We've begun to look at the implementation of all of our programs at the agency through the lens of this definition. Next slide. And the way we're doing that is by addressing it in our strategic plan. So the first goal of our strategic plan is around equity. So instilling equity as a foundation of emergency management. Disasters impact people and communities differently. And no matter what index you use to evaluate disasters, marginalized communities are more vulnerable to the impacts of a disaster. We see that across all different types of disasters. In natural disasters like floods, those can disproportionately impact communities with older homes that aren't built to the latest building code standards, or communities that have not undergone some mitigation like elevating utilities or new stormwater systems. The mitigation projects designed to keep water out are more common in communities that have the resources to implement those. And even in non-natural disasters like a pandemic, the most vulnerable communities were disproportionately impacted by the economic and health impacts of COVID. Next slide, please. So I want to give a little bit of background about FEMA's hazard mitigation programs. Rick Deal is on, and he's the one you should call if you're interested in pursuing a hazard mitigation project in Pennsylvania. But this is available to all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the US territories, as well as federally recognized tribes. So FEMA has 3 big major hazard mitigation assistance programs. These grants are BRIC, FMA, and HMGP. There's others as well, but these are the big ones. So HMGP, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, funding for mitigation opens up after a declared disaster. For BRIC and FMA, these are annual grants that open up each year, whether or not a disaster occurs. And these programs can fund large-scale mitigation projects, home-level mitigation projects like elevations or acquisitions. They also fund hazard mitigation plans, community and capacity building, other kinds of studies. There's a lot communities can access with this funding. To access this, municipalities and state agencies are the primary sub-applicants. And if you're in Pennsylvania, the sub-applicants would apply to FEMA, who would then apply to FEMA. And this funding allows communities who would otherwise have a difficult time paying for mitigation, allows them to implement it. Even at a small scale, large scale, there's more funding now for hazard mitigation than ever in the past. Next slide, please. So over time, we still see that communities that are the best resourced access federal dollars for hazard mitigation funding. And to address that inequity, Executive Order 14008 was signed by President Biden, and that created the Justice 40 initiative. This goal says that for certain federal programs, 40% of funding should flow to disadvantaged communities. Next slide. So the federal programs that are covered under Justice 40, they direct investment into disadvantaged local communities and in the program areas that are seen on the slide here. So climate change, clean energy and energy efficiency, clean transportation, affordable and sustainable housing, training and workforce development, remediation and reduction of legacy pollution, and critical clean water and waste infrastructure. So these are programs across the federal government. And for FEMA, the BRIC and FMA programs are non-disaster grants are covered under this program. So what that actually looks like is that 40% of the funding is directed to go to disadvantaged communities. Next slide. So what counts as a disadvantaged community? It's very difficult to answer that because there's many tools and indices that could show if a community is disadvantaged or not. Initially, our guidance for BRIC and FMA at FEMA was pretty open-ended. So communities use data like existing indices like the Social Vulnerability Index or just census data to show that they were disadvantaged, and they included that in their application for FEMA funding. And the reason it was open-ended is because it's difficult to develop a measurement that represents disadvantage at a national level. On the slide here at the bottom, we have some different indicators of disadvantage that communities can identify in order to, gain more points on the application to increase the chances of them getting BRIC or FMA funding. So if you go to the next slide, I have some additional indicators of disadvantage here listed. And one thing I want to note is that FEMA is expected to release our new notice of funding opportunity for BRIC and FMA. So it's an annual grant cycle. We're just waiting to get all of that information over the next days or weeks, and that will provide clear guidance on how we're going to measure and also include in our qualitative review of these applications on how disadvantage is measured and how communities can be defined as disadvantaged. But one thing that we do expect to be using is the Climate and Economic Justice Grading Tool, which is called CEJST. And that will be used to help determine communities that would be covered under Justice 40. Will go into more detail on how this tool works and what variables go into it. But regardless, this tool is very, very unique and is great for gaining really important information and data about communities that can be used for a wide variety of purposes, not just FEMA BRIC grants. I'm looking forward to seeing how other agencies use it in their programs too, because the CEJST tool goes beyond FEMA, it's across the federal government. Next slide. So before I pass it to Will, who will kind of get into the meat of everything, I just want to acknowledge some of the different initiatives we're doing within FEMA Region 3. FEMA Region 3 covers Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Delaware, and Washington, D.C. So we work with our state and district partners to implement mitigation in those areas. And this is some of the work that we're doing to look at equity and to make our programs more equitable. So we convened a FEMA State Equity Working Group with state partners, and we're looking at two important topics: advancing technical assistance to communities that have a lower capacity for implementing mitigation, and floodplain management and affordable housing. That's a very important intersection, since development in the floodplain, is challenging. We don't want people to suffer in the case of a flood. But when it comes to affordable housing, there's a lot of affordable housing in the floodplain. Restricting development could lead to a glut of affordable housing. So it's a really important intersection. We've done some research around what different kind of policies address that challenge. Additionally, our mapping team uses social vulnerability data as a decision-making factor in the 5-year plan for flood mapping. And they do the same thing for identifying communities in need of technical assistance for floodplain management. And then, of course, as I just mentioned, directing funding towards communities covered under Justice 40. So with that, I'll pass it over to Will, who's going to go over mitigation tools and data.
Thanks, Hailey. All right. Hi again, everyone. We're going to be going over a lot of different tools. Some of them we're going to do some hands-on demo, and then others we're just going to briefly overview. Created kind of a standard process for the description of the tool, the uses of the tool, and who the audience is for each of our different data sets and tools. Some of them are owned and operated by FEMA and updated, and some are, at a different programmatic level or agency level. So I think the big one that we want to start with is the climate economic justice screening tool. So this is a unique tool, as Hailey mentioned before, in the fact that it kind of identifies communities that are disadvantaged based on a variety of categories of burden. So there are 8 different categories of burden. There's climate change, energy, health, housing, legacy pollution, transportation, water and wastewater, and workforce development. So to identify these different indicators, we use a combination of data. There's census data, there's agency specific data, and everything's kind of outlined in the website itself. So if you get a little more interested in what it takes to identify as a disadvantaged community, you have that opportunity to see what those different indicators and thresholds were that create that level, identify them as disadvantaged. So Hailey pretty much went over the use cases of this tool. We have 40% of our overall benefits are invested in these disadvantaged communities. So if you have a mitigation project or proposed grant project in one of these communities that are identified, it's going to be a lot easier to get that competitive funding. So let's just jump in right now and take a look at this tool. So it's pretty easy to find. You can either Google it or use a link that we're going to be sharing with the PowerPoint. I hope we can share them, but and it will take you directly to the website where the map is like pretty much at your front page. So you're going to be able to control where you're going right away with the map, and it will typically be at the U.S. national level when you open it up. But I've already zoomed it into Harrisburg just to take a closer look. So here we can click an area. These are all census tracts. It'll zoom in, tell us a little bit about that tract information, about the ethnicity, the age, and of course, it's identified as disadvantaged because all of the blue shaded census tracts are going to be the disadvantaged communities. So what it takes to be disadvantaged is just one threshold, one burden, and an associated economic threshold. So one burden based on these 8, and then of course I think typically the associated economic threshold is just above 65th percentile in low income. So you can actually click the highlighted category burden based on the census tract you're on. It could be multiple, and this shows you that due to traffic proximity and volume, count of vehicles at major roads within 500 meters, and the nature of it being low income, so it has to be both. This is triggered that threshold, and it's considered identified as disadvantaged. So you'll see a variety of different indicators that pop, you could say, that create that community's disadvantage. So it may not take much to trigger that. Of course, that low income perspective, that socioeconomic pressure is something to consider, but it could just be one threshold that gets lit and it will become disadvantaged, whereas you'll have 4. It just goes to show you, if you want to dig into the data, you'll find more about how many thresholds are actually triggering in different areas. You can also download this data. You can go to the methodology page at the top, and that'll tell you more about how these indicators are how the thresholds are met, and how percentiles work, and how we rank pretty much every track against other tracks in the nation using percentiles. So I'm going to get back to the PowerPoint. We're going to continue on. So, I mean, just having this information that you find in this map, even if it's just screenshots or what have you, in your applications and your plans for those mitigation actions you want to take, is going to already be a benefit. So as we go forward, you're going to notice a trend where we use data from one tool in another tool. So don't be surprised when you see a little bit of that going on. The next one is a big one. So this one you may have seen in the national news recently. It's FEMA's National Risk Index, and it uses 18 different national hazards to build a composite index or score for how much risk a census tract or a county has, how much social vulnerability they have, and how much resilience do they have. So you have your 18 different hazards, the risk there, what the expected loss for those in annually, And then, they multiply that by vulnerability and put that over resilience. So the vulnerability is using the SVI, or Social Vulnerability Index, via the CDC, Center for Disease Control. And then we have community resilience, which is, it's actually the acronym's the same as our BRIC program, but Building Resilience in Communities, I believe, is the acronym. And that is from the University of South Carolina. So this tool you can use to enhance mitigation plans, encourage communities to like communicate about where risk is and engage on that, educating homeowners, more refined risk assessments. So if you're planning, you need a plan to get these grants. First off, you need to identify where the action needs to be taken to get these grants. So you can use this tool to start finding those areas of action and risk, and start prioritizing resources there. And this is really for everyone, from your public all the way up to your state and federal. So I'm going to do a little bit of a guide through this one. I always get stuck behind this bar. All right, so this one, pretty straightforward. You could either switch between census tract view or county view. Census tract view is always going to be higher resolution. You could choose to actually look at the index for each of the 18. Some won't apply to some places, as you know, but each of the 18 hazards, you can see where their loss may be, and this just symbolizes the maps in this kind of color. You can see where the social vulnerability is and where there's community resilience. So let's just click a county, where you can click a census tract, and it'll give you a lot more information about that census tract, what the relative scores are, how the risk was calculated. You could even click to create a report and add this to your community plan. So you can compare census tracts within your counties and do all sorts of stuff, but there's a ton of wealth of information in here that can be used to incorporate into your planning and prioritization. You can download, print, do whatever you want with this kind of stuff. A lot of these tools have built-in report features, which are really neat. Right? So that is the National Risk Index, moving right along. So next we have the CDRZs, so the Community Disaster Resilience Zones. These are new. These are very new. The law was signed in by President Biden and last year, pretty much, and not even a year ago. And this is kind of a play on the Justice 40 initiative to build more specific prioritization and resilience into specific communities, which we base these communities on data sets we've already established, that we've already just gone over. The two are the NRI, which you just saw, and the CEJST data. So let's go into this tool, and you'll see a little bit more about it. Okay, put this thing down. All right, so we jumped right in. This data just came out a few weeks ago, so it's rather new. We're still identifying kind of like where we have our zones, why they're zones, and maybe whether like they should be zones. So we're still talking a lot about this. We want to find out what communities are in these zones. The tool itself is pretty basic. Like, we like a nice simple tool, right? It's just telling you one thing. Well, you could add more information if you'd like to. You could see that screening tool and how that overlaps. You could see the National Risk Index data and how that overlaps. But what these tools are, and I'll just click one of these just to give you that kind of information of what makes them identified as a community disaster resilience zone. First off, use case. This is going to be, they're going to be prioritized for better cost shares. They're going to go a little deeper than the disadvantaged community scoring system goes. These specific, since there's so few of them, resilient community disaster resilience zones are going to get more elevated funding and prioritization for BRIC and other community programs. So what makes a community disaster resilience zone? So the composite National Risk Index score that we just saw, it has to be in the either in the top 50 or the top 1% of their state. So all the top 1%, there's 21 in Pennsylvania, all the top 1% National Risk Index scores in that state. That's not the only thing that will qualify them as a community disaster resilience zone, because there is more than 21. It has to also be identified as a disadvantage
Looks like we just lost Will for a moment. Oh, he's back. Will, you're on mute. I think you got to reshare.
How long was I gone for?
Like 2 minutes.
Okay. So
Let me
where did
see
I
where you
where did I leave off?
You were showing us the map, the CDRZ map.
Okay, I was showing you the tool itself.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. Was I able to click a place and show the pop-up?
Yep.
Okay, so well,
You
that's
can start there again. Yeah.
cool. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm actually in Austin, so the connection is, who knows what the connection is right now. So anyway, these two criteria need to be satisfied for it to be a community disaster resilience zone. It has to rank top 50 nationally or top 1% in the state, but also identify as a disadvantaged community with our previous screening tool. So those two things need to have to both be triggered to identify these disadvantaged areas. And you have here the listing kind of how many zones we have in each of our states in the region, with Pennsylvania having the lion's share. And we're actually working with them a little bit to identify communities that are in these zones so we can start targeting. All right, next up. So this is another piece of a puzzle that we're going to get into. So the building code adaptation tracking, or tracker, you could say, evaluates several aspects of communities' natural hazard risks and building code adoption. So you have flood, hurricane, seismic, tornado, damaging wind. It evaluates kind of the different known weaknesses and provisions of the adopted building codes. It tells you what the mandatory building codes that your state or territory has required. And Pennsylvania has all the municipalities, so each individual municipality can kind of control the building code. And you can see in a little bit, if you look closely, we have some greens in there. So it's municipalities who have adopted higher building code standards. So we track that. You can click on each community and get more information. You kind of see here on the left with York as an example, when they've adopted it, when the latest changes were. So this is an effort for us because we know building codes really are one of the strongest indicators of mitigation resilience. All right, so I'm not going to show this one, but this data kind of gets lumped in with this tool. So this tool is our climate mapping for resilience adaptation. I'm used to just saying camera, so it's always a pain when I have to relearn what the acronyms actually mean. So this is a tool where you can look at current and future climate hazard. This is not what you're seeing right here is just the report. So the tool itself will take you through a bunch of different kinds of hazards. It will show you things like flood, extreme heat, wind, and their likelihood at the end of the century and 100 more years, and how we're kind of trending in that direction based on the location on a map. So then you can specifically click an area, you choose what kind of hazard you want to look into, and you can build a nice nifty report that you're seeing right here. So this is Garrett County. It tells you a little bit about their population. It tells you about their building code hazard resistance. So what is their building code level at? Theirs is resistant, so they have a green one. And then it tells you what percent of the population is disadvantaged. And that's using the CEJST tool data. So we're looking at 33% of the tracks in this county are disadvantaged. So these kind of indicators, and then it goes on to tell you, well, the modeled history, the early century models, the mid-century model, the late century model, and what maximum temperatures can we expect in the long term. And then it gives you a little information about the NRI, which is blank at the moment because I don't think we have information for that county. So this is just one of those things that can identify not only areas that can benefit from federal investment in climate resilience from the Justice 40 initiative, but you could also review like proposed projects by entering the address and looking at the point map and seeing and generating PDF reports to say, yeah, we are on the right track here. This is what we're doing. And it lumps a lot of that data into one place that you're really thinking about. I think it's just another one of those things to incorporate with any kind of project application. It's kind of checking all the boxes, you could say. So now we're going to jump into like a little bit away from that grant stuff and benefits from that, the more impactful ones. These are kind of like cool to know about, specific things you may not have seen that Region 3 has to offer. So, and these are, you can find them in a link below, and we can also find them in what's called MIT maps, which is where we have our mitigation maps, like all of them in one place, like the kitchen sink of mitigation data. And I'll show you that at the end. But the purpose of this is just at a regional level to track where our firm's mapping projects are. Where are we updating our firm maps? You know, going through the preliminary, the draft, the effective, and delivering all that data. And, you know, working with the communities as we do that, going through that risk map cycle. So this is where all the work is being done, who's participating and what stage it's in. You can all see on this map. Use cases, you know, local state and awareness for undergoing or upcoming project studies. And then upcoming flood map changes. So we're saying, we're going to have different 100-year, 1% annual year floodplains in our communities. So let's use this next tool. This is the Region 3 changes since last firm data set viewer. So this is when you do go through that map change, you can see right here, and it will tell you the differences between in the special flood hazard area or the 100-year. And I love how we have like a million names for it. But it'll tell you the differences, whether there's increases in the floodplain or decreases in the floodplain. Yellow represents the increase, purple represents the decrease. So people will be able to see whether they're going in or out of the floodplain, which I think is a very important thing, because it's one of our other very important products that just tell us a yes or no answer. I mean, there's more data to it, and hopefully there will be even more in the future with our future flood risk map bundles, which I can't wait to present to y'all. But for now, it's one of those things where it's just you're in or you're out. All right, so communities undergoing flood insurance rate studies, usually the ones we provide them the link, it's bookmarked right to the location of their community and they can engage. So another tool that's kind of off the beaten path for mitigation a little bit, well, it does contain a lot of that information, and a lot of the information we just went through, almost all of it to be precise. This is like your one-stop shop for like a situational viewer, for pre, post, current hazards, over 100 preloaded data layers. You can kind of see an example of some of them over here. What we say is this is like your GIS. It gives everybody GIS access to community data and analysis tools. And there are some tools built in as well. But it's GIS analyst in your pocket. So if you don't have a GIS person like myself in your agency or that can support you and help you, this tool is going to get you as close as you can get otherwise. So you can start doing that analysis. You can start overlaying those different data sets and say, hey, where do I need to focus? Or if you already have an area of focus, you want to tell a bigger story or add some context, you can do that with this tool. And then we have a little different too. We're going back because I got to shout out the PA flood risk tool. We're doing this with FEMA, and this is a tool since our national flood hazard layer viewer, you know, I'm not going to say it's the best. We're working on improving it. It goes down, especially during the, you know, busy hours of the day. It's kind of disappointing. It doesn't have a lot of cool tools. It's some of the other state viewers have on your house, the rooftop. Find out what floodplain you're in, what zone you're in, what parcel you're in. You get a risk summary report. I could download the default firm panel, and if you're in a depth grid, it'll tell you how deep the flood will be if it's 100 years, and it'll show you a picture of what that looks like when you're looking at a car, a house, and a person. So if you haven't checked this tool out, go for it. It's very cool. It's managed by Penn State through a CTP grant. And do you remember when I told you about mitigation maps, the one-stop shop as well for, you know, maybe not all the layers like the RAPT tool that we looked at, but this is going to have all the different viewers we kind of looked over. And it's getting a big update that looks 1,000 times better, I promise. It'll redirect you to that site when we do update it. So keep this bookmarked. You'll be able to find that one next. It's going to be a much more organized way of binning or guys categorizing our viewers, so it's easier and more intuitive to find them right now. Right now, it's just a list of this. right, I don't see any questions in the chat at least, but
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, it's fine to come off mute and ask. We're happy. We have some time to answer any questions.
I will leave that actually the emails in case you guys have any questions later, need any support. All right, Rick. That covers us.
That was a great presentation, Will and Haley. I thank you guys. I think we can give everybody a lot of time back. I think that's all we had today. I appreciate everybody's time. And I thank you guys both. And again, I want to thank Dr. Seppialba and her staff over at Millersville University for allowing us to do this. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.